In 2006, I was a college student at ASU. I lived in an off-campus apartment on the ground floor, and it was a block off a major street in Phoenix called Baseline. These details are important. In the summer of 2006, Phoenix, Arizona was plagued by two serial killers. One was the Phoenix shooter, who ended up being a team of two guys randomly shooting people, and the other was the Baseline killer, a rapist and murderer. Having two serial killers put the entire city on edge, and everyone was talking about it. I even saw articles in Time or Newsweek about the situation. The fall of 2006 semester had just started. Now, you may have heard this, but Phoenix is hot in August. It would get stuffy in my apartment, and so I'd leave the window cracked a little because the morning air is nice. The blinds provided visual cover. One morning, a strange sound woke me up. It was at the crack of dawn at 4:45 a.m., and the sun was just barely coming up. The sound was a tapping sound, and it seemed intentional, but I thought it could be a bird or some branches or something trivial. I ignored it, and it went away after a bit. After about 90 seconds of silence, the tapping returned, and it was absolutely purposeful. In my mind, I thought it was my boyfriend who thought it was cute to try and scare me sometimes. I decided I'd be a bit of a brat and make him wait, but I was also getting really angry. How dare he pull a prank when I'm trying to sleep? This is just not like him. I'm going to give him a piece of my mind about disturbing my sleep like this. The tapping continued. At a certain point, I got up to get a glass of water, still being in the mindset of wanting to annoy my stupid boyfriend who thought this would be funny. I saw some movement through the slits in my blinds, and I marched over and yanked the blind so I could see. Definitely not my boyfriend. I said very loudly, "What the fuck?" He sort of seemed to be taken back by my anger, but only slightly. The man I saw will be with me forever, or more specifically, his eyes and the feeling they gave me were insanely creepy. Honestly, words can't do justice to how terrifying his eyes were. They looked like black orbs with no white in them. Absolutely predatory. When I see the pictures of Ted Bundy or Charles Manson, that's exactly what he looked like. Even if you saw a picture of how they looked, it's different when you experience it in person. He was crouched down, like an umpire. He had on dark pants, a purple shirt, and a white Nike hat. He had dark skin. I thought he was Hispanic, but later found out he was a light-skinned black guy. You'll find out how I learned this later. After I yelled "what the fuck" at him, he whispers to me, "Can I talk to you?" If you want to know how insanely creepy that is to hear, just whisper that sentence out loud to yourself right now. It sends chills down my spine when I think of how that sounded. His hand subtly moved towards his waist. I later learned he would blitz attack his victims and he probably had a gun. This is about a 3-second interaction at this point. For some reason, I thought of Ted Bundy and how he'd pretend to be crippled to target his victims. I thought of my mom telling me not to be nice with strangers. Don't be afraid to be a bitch. My thinking wasn't as calculated as all that, but it was more nano-processing of how to deal with this situation. So when he whispered that, I started yelling at him, "Hell no! Get the fuck out of here, douchebag!" I shut the window angrily and locked it. I laid down and wondered if I'd been too mean. What if he needed help? But then why would he be like tapping and whispering if he was in trouble? He's probably a creep after all. I was too annoyed to go back to sleep, but I sort of laid down. I told my roommate about an hour later, and she sort of jokingly asked if it was the Baseline killer. When she said that, my heart sank. His face looked exactly like it did in the police sketches that were on billboards everywhere. The only problem is that the billboards showed him with dreads, and the man at my window had no dreads. Apparently he was some sort of disguise artist who'd wear wigs. Updating the police sketch would have been a nice move, but they didn't. I called the Phoenix police, and the detective I talked to agreed that it sounded like his MO. The suspect would say something to throw off his target, and then he'd blitz attack. The detective said my angry response probably made me seem like too much of a hassle, and he moved on. The only problem was that I thought the guy looked Hispanic, and the detective said that many witnesses described him as black. I thought they might come out and try for samples or surveillance video or something, but I didn't hear back from the detective. My parents freaked out, then got us knives, pepper spray, and put up signs. We tried to leave the apartment complex, and we learned another tenant had been complaining about the exact same thing. I never learned the details, but this idiot was apparently going around the damn complex trying to find a target. The stupid apartment wouldn't let us break our lease, so we moved to a second-floor apartment right above our old unit. Side note, the neighbors who moved into our old unit were horrible, obnoxious tweakers who would do meth and play pitbull on repeat for hours, and have knife fights at 11 a.m. on the weekdays. Hey, sounds like my old neighbors from Oregon. There were times I wondered if they might be worse than the actual serial killer who came to my window. So that unit was cursed somehow. On September 4th, 2006, they arrested Marc Goudot. I think the detective didn't call me back because they were days away from arresting Goudot. When I saw his mugshot, I was sick, but also relieved. He was absolutely the guy outside my window. To me, he looked like he could have been Hispanic. You can judge for yourself if you Google it. He's on death row in Arizona right now. His wife tried to mount some campaign to show the police were framing him or something. On a personal level, it certainly would have made an interesting coincidence if the framed innocent guy was also whispering like a creep and tapping my window. The other cool thing about this story is that I had a really bad eating disorder at the time, and about 8 months after this happened, I got in solid recovery. I never would have experienced how wonderful life could be if the slightest thing would have changed that morning in 2006. I can't think of something scarier than a serial killer tapping on your window. That actually happened to me, and if it happens to you, just scare them right back. Don't be afraid to be downright rude to someone who's injecting themselves into your space. It could save your life if you're not afraid to throw your weight around and tell someone off. In 2003, I was a 16-year-old employee at an urban clothing store here on the south side of Chicago. At the time, I had a manager who was in his early 20s by the name of Anthony. Anthony was pretty arrogant and obnoxious, but overall he was a pretty cool guy. I used to kind of give him shit and tease him when it came to approaching the ladies, because he always seemed timid or too aggressive. I was and still am a ladies' man, so yeah, I was being an asshole. After working at this place for about 3 months, Anthony asked me if I would drop him off at home. It wasn't far from the direction I was headed in, so I dropped him off maybe twice a week for the next month or so. Now let me tell you, these car rides were quite uncomfortable. This guy, as much as we spoke at work, would not speak and sort of just kept looking straight. It got to the point where his awkwardness went from entertaining to straight creepy. I was 16. Most awkward people are interesting to teenagers. Fast forward 3 or 4 years later. I'm watching the news and they go into detail of a horrific crime committed by a Comcast installation worker. Apparently the Comcast worker entered 2 homes that were due for an installation, raped, beat, and strangled the 2 women. The real unfortunate thing is this happened on 2 different occasions, and after the first murder the gentleman was arrested and questioned, but released and sent back to work, which allowed him to strike again. As the picture of the mugshot flashed on the screen, I froze. It was Anthony. Growing up on the south side of Chicago, I had grown up and befriended a fair share of people who grew up to be murderers, but this took the cake. So, Anthony Triplet, let's not meet, because that means I'm going to jail with you. In the late 70s, my uncle was studying medicine at the University of Chicago. After a morning class, he decided that he would hitchhike back home to Lincoln Park on the north side instead of pay for a taxi. A man drove up in a Plymouth Satellite and offered my uncle a ride. The man looked normal and seemed friendly, lighthearted even, so my uncle got in the car and they started driving towards Lakeshore Drive. However, once they got there, the man drove south on Lakeshore instead of north towards Lincoln Park. My uncle told the man that he was going the wrong way and to turn around and head north. The man looked at my uncle, put his hand on his knee and said, "No, son, you are coming with me," and smiled darkly at him. My uncle froze in panic, and when they hit traffic near the South Shore, he quickly unlocked the passenger door and ran away without looking back. A year or two later, on a cold December day, my uncle was having a coffee in a cafe with my future aunt when he caught something on the TV that made his blood run cold. He saw the man that had picked him up from school that day the year before. He had been arrested for the suspected rape and killing of over 20 young men and boys. The man on the television was John Wayne Gacy, and he had removed the door handle off the passenger side door to prevent the men he picked up from escaping. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. And if you would like a chance to have your story featured in an upcoming video, make sure you email it to urmaker6260@gmail.com. And if you would like to help support the channel, make sure you check out the sponsor button down by the subscribe button. It's like $4.99 US currency, I'm not sure what that equates to everywhere else. And that'll give you a few perks. One of those being a channel badge, as well as access to the sponsor-only streams that we do once a month at least. I hope everyone had a great Valentine's Day, and I'll catch you in the next video. And just remember, it's always scarier if it's true. Bad bye.